My name is Claire Donnelly. I'm 22 years old, and for 6 years, I've been the most trusted babysitter in Cedar Hollow. Parents call me for the nights nobody else wants. The overnight shifts, the kids other sitters won't handle. I have references, I have a spotless record. I have never once walked out on a job. Until the night I met the Ashworth children. I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened in that house. I don't scare easily. I've handled tantrums, night terrors, kids who bite, kids who scream for hours. None of that prepared me for a 9-year-old girl who looked me dead in the eye and said, "You won't stay past midnight." None of them do. That was the first thing Emma Ashworth ever said to me. Not hello, not my name is Emma. Just a warning, delivered like a weather report. If you're the kind of viewer who likes stories that start calm and end somewhere you never expected, stay with me, because this one earns it. And if that sounds like your kind of horror, subscribe to Eerie Atmos X now, so you don't lose this channel before the story gets where it's going. It started on a Tuesday in late October. Mrs. Ashworth called the agency I work through, asking specifically for me. Not a request, a demand. She said her regular sitter had, in her words, had a family emergency and couldn't make it. $600 for one night, cash, up front, no questions. I should have asked why the pay was triple the going rate. I didn't. I needed the money. And $600 doesn't come with warning labels. The Ashworth house sits at the very end of Trenholm Road, past where the streetlights stop, where the county stopped paving and the trees start leaning in over the road like they're listening. I remember pulling up at 5:45, the porch light already burning orange against a sky that hadn't fully gone dark yet. 3 stories, fieldstone and dark wood, windows too narrow for a house that size, like the architect wanted the inside kept private from the outside. Mrs. Ashworth met me at the door before I even reached it. Tall woman, tailored coat despite being inside her own home. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. She looked past me at my car, then at the road behind it, like she was checking whether anyone had followed. "You're punctual," she said. "Good. That matters here, inside." The house smelled like cedar, and something underneath it I couldn't place. Old paper, maybe, or dust that had settled somewhere. It wasn't meant to settle. Emma was sitting on the staircase when I walked in, dark hair pulled back tight, a cardigan buttoned to the collar despite the house being warm. She didn't say hello either. She just watched me the way you'd watch weather rolling in. Her brother, Toby, was 7, and I didn't see him at first. I heard him, a soft, rhythmic tapping from somewhere upstairs, steady as a clock. Mrs. Ashworth walked me through the rules fast, like she'd rehearsed them, and wanted the recitation over with. Dinner at 6:30, sharp, bedtime at 8, no negotiation. Do not, under any circumstance, go into the room at the end of the 3rd floor hallway. That last one she said twice. It's storage, she added, like the word could close the subject. Nothing in there concerns you. Her husband, she said, traveled for work and wouldn't be home. She herself had a dinner in the city she absolutely could not miss, and she'd be back by midnight. Midnight. That word again. Emma's word. I asked, casually, why the pay was so high for one evening. Mrs. Ashworth's smile didn't move, but something behind her eyes did. Because most people don't last, she said. You will, I can already tell. Then she was gone, taillights disappearing down Trenholm Road into the dark, and I was alone in a house with 2 children who I'd known for 11 minutes. Dinner went fine. Better than fine, actually. Toby turned out to be sweet in a quiet way, drawing pictures on his napkin instead of eating his vegetables, sliding them toward me like offerings. Emma ate in silence, watching the doorway more than her plate, like she was counting something only she could see. I asked her what she meant earlier, about people not staying past midnight. She set her fork down very precisely. They've been 4 before you, she said. This year, 4 sitters, 1 year. I told myself that some families just go through help fast, picky standards. Bad reviews on the agency site. I hadn't bothered to check. I told myself a lot of things at night that turned out to be wrong. Around 7:30, while I was clearing plates, I heard it for the first time. A sound from the 3rd floor. Not footsteps, not the house settling. A single, deliberate knock. Then silence. Then another. Exactly 11 seconds later, like something was keeping time. I asked Emma if her father was home after all. She looked at the ceiling, then at me, and said, "He doesn't knock like that." I want you to sit with that answer for a second. The way I had to, because it wasn't a denial, it was a distinction. Bedtime came at 8, exactly like Mrs. Ashworth promised. Toby went without a fight, hugging a stuffed rabbit, missing one button eye. Emma took longer. At her door, she grabbed my wrist, quick and hard for a 9-year-old, and said something I've replayed 100 times since. If you hear 3 knocks close together, don't go up. If you hear 1 knock, alone, that's not for you either. It's only safe when there's nothing at all. Then she shut her door, and I stood in that hallway with my heart doing something it had no business doing over a kid's bedtime superstition. I told myself it was exactly that, a superstition. Kids invent rules to feel in control of houses that scare them. I'd seen it before with other families, other big empty homes that echoed too much for small children to feel safe in. I went downstairs, poured myself tea I never drank, and sat in the front room with my phone, doing the thing you do when a house feels too quiet. I turned on music low, just for company. At 8:51, the knocking came back. One knock, then, 9 seconds later, 2 more, close together, 3, total, but not delivered as 3, delivered as 1, then a pair. I didn't know yet if that counted as Emma's 3 close together or not, and that ambiguity was somehow worse than a clear signal would have been. I climbed the stairs to the second floor and checked on both kids. Toby was asleep, rabbit clutched to his chest, breathing slow and even. Emma's door was cracked open 2 inches, and through the gap I could see her sitting upright in bed, eyes open, completely still, staring at her closed closet door. I whispered her name. She didn't answer. I said it again. Nothing. Just that fixed, glassy stillness. The kind you see in kids in the half-second before they wake up screaming from a nightmare. Except she never screamed. And she never blinked either. I stood in that doorway for almost a full minute, watching a 9-year-old stare at furniture, like it owed her something. Then, without turning her head, she said, "It's not knocking for me tonight. I want to tell you I left that room calmly." I didn't. I backed out of it, the way you back away from something that might be sleeping. Downstairs, I called the agency emergency line, mostly to have another adult voice in my ear. No answer. I called Mrs. Ashworth's cell. Straight to voicemail. A generic automated greeting. No name attached to it at all, which struck me as strange for a woman who introduced herself with such precision. At 9:40, my phone buzzed. Not a call, a text. From a number I didn't recognize, 6 digits shorter than a normal cell number. The kind of number that shouldn't exist. It said, "Don't open the 3rd floor door tonight," whatever it says. I stood in that kitchen, holding my phone like it had grown teeth. I want to be honest with you about what I did next, because it wasn't smart. And I know that now. I went upstairs, not to the 3rd floor, just to the 2nd floor landing, to the base of the staircase that led up into the dark, because I needed to see it, needed to prove to myself it was just a staircase. The knocking had stopped completely. And that silence, Emma's silence, the one she said was the only safe kind, felt worse than any knock had. I stood at the bottom of those stairs for what felt like 10 minutes, watching a narrow band of darkness at the top where the hallway began, waiting for anything, a shadow, a sound, a reason to either run or relax. Neither came. What came instead was Toby's bedroom door creaking open behind me. I turned, expecting a scared 7-year-old needing water or a nightlight. Instead, he was standing in his doorway, wide awake, rabbit dangling from one hand, and he asked me a question in a voice calm for a kid his age. "Did you find the room yet?" I told him no. I told him I wasn't going to. He nodded slowly, like that was the correct answer to a test, and said, "Good. She only gets in if you go looking for her. She, not it, not something, she." I asked him who she was. He just looked past me, up the dark staircase, and said, "The one before Emma's sitter." She didn't listen either. I need you to understand that at this point, I still hadn't seen anything. No shadow, no figure, nothing you could point a camera at and prove existed. Just a children delivering fragments of a story. It was something they'd rehearsed for exactly this moment, for exactly this kind of night. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't the kind of story that hands you easy answers. And honestly, that's what I love writing for this channel. Real dread doesn't explain itself, it just accumulates. I got Toby back into bed. He went easily, almost gratefully, like the conversation had cost him something, and he was glad it was over. Back downstairs, I sat with my phone in my lap, the unknown number's message still glowing on the screen. I typed out a reply. "Who is this?" I hit send. It bounced back undelivered, like the number had stopped existing the moment it finished warning me. At 10:15, the temperature in the house dropped, not dramatically, not horror movie dramatically, just enough that I noticed goosebumps on my arms and went looking for a thermostat, and found it already set exactly where it should be. The furnace running fine, the vents blowing warm air that somehow didn't feel warm at all by the time it reached me. Somewhere around 10:30, I convinced myself I'd overreacted. I told myself that grief does strange things to houses, that maybe a family who'd lost someone, an uncle, a relative, anyone, might raise kids who inherited that grief for superstition instead of sadness, and that everything I'd heard so far had a plain explanation, sitting just out of reach. I made myself a cup of tea I still didn't drink, just to have something warm to hold. I checked the windows, more out of habit than fear, and found every single one locked from the inside, which should have comforted me, and somehow didn't, because I didn't remember locking any of them myself, and Mrs. Ashworth certainly hadn't stopped to do it on her way out the door. For almost 10 minutes, nothing happened at all. No knocking, no cold spots, just an ordinary house at 10:30 at night. Furnace humming, refrigerator cycling on and off, the kind of background noise you stop noticing in your own home and notice desperately in someone else's. I almost let myself relax. I remember that specifically, because it's the part of the night I keep coming back to. The false calm. The 10 minutes where I thought maybe the worst of it had passed, where I actually reached for my phone to text a friend that the job was easy money after all. Strange family, sweet enough kids, nothing to worrying about. I never sent that text. At 10:40, I heard the first knock of the night that I couldn't attribute to anything rational. One knock, alone, from directly above the front room ceiling, which put it on the second floor, not the third. Closer to me than anything had been all night. Emma's rule echoed in my head. One knock, alone, isn't for you either. Isn't for me either. Meaning it was for someone, just not the children, and not, apparently, me. I climbed the stairs anyway, because sitting still with that thought was worse than moving. Both kids' doors were shut, both rooms silent. When I pressed my ear close enough to hear breathing, the knock came again, and this time I could place it precisely, not the ceiling, the wall between Emma's room and the hallway closet. A wall too thin for a house built with fieldstone and old growth timber. A wall that felt, when I touched it, colder than the plaster around it by several degrees. I want to describe what I felt in that moment honestly, because I think fear like that deserves accuracy instead of exaggeration. It wasn't the sharp jolt of a jump scare. It was slower. It was my body understanding something before my mind agreed to catch up. A cold weight settling low in my stomach. My hands finding reasons to stay busy, so they wouldn't shake. I went back downstairs. I did not investigate the third floor. I want that on record, because everything that came after might have gone differently if I had. At 11 o'clock, my phone rang. Mrs. Ashworth's name lit up the screen, and I answered so fast I nearly dropped it. Her voice was strange, too smooth, like she was reading from something rather than speaking. She asked if the children were asleep. I told her about the knocking, about the strange text, about Toby's comment about the one before Emma's sitter. There was a long pause on her end, long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. Then she said, "You weren't supposed to hear about her yet." Not, "There's no her." Not, "The kids are just imaginative." You weren't supposed to hear about her yet, like there was a schedule, a correct order in which a babysitter was meant to learn the truth about that house, and I'd jumped ahead of it. I asked her directly, "Who is she?" Mrs. Ashworth said, "I'll explain everything when I get home. Just don't let them go to the third floor. And don't go yourself, no matter what you hear coming from up there." I mean that as literally as a person can mean anything. Then she hung up, before I could ask a single follow-up question, and the dial tone that followed felt like the loneliest sound I'd heard in my entire life. I sat with that for a long moment. No, don't go, no matter what you hear, which meant she expected me to hear something specific enough to tempt me. At 11:20, I heard my name, not shouted, not desperate, just spoken, clearly, from somewhere above me, in a voice that had almost the shape of Mrs. Ashworth's voice, except wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. The consonants slightly too crisp, like someone had learned to speak by listening rather than by growing up doing it. Claire, once, then silence again. I stood frozen in that front room for what felt like an hour, and was probably 90 seconds, running through every rational explanation available to me. A pipe, a draft moving through the old house's bones, my own exhausted mind manufacturing patterns out of noise, because I'd been sitting alone in the dark listening to hard for too long. None of those explanations accounted for my name. I checked on the kids again. This time, both were awake, sitting up in their separate rooms, doors open, facing their doorways like they'd been waiting for me to come check. Emma spoke first. "She only says your name if she's already close." "Close to what?" I asked. "Close to being let in," she said. "She needs someone to say yes, out loud. That's the only rule that matters. All the others are just to buy time." I asked her what would happen if I said yes. Toby answered instead, from his doorway, voice small and steady. "Then you become the reason she stays another year, instead of one of us." I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't fully believe any of it, not in the way you believe solid, provable things. But belief stopped being the point somewhere around 11:30 that night. What mattered was that two children I barely knew were describing, independently, a raw structure that made an unnerving amount of internal sense. And something in that house had said my name in a voice built out of a woman's voice, but wearing it like a coat that didn't quite fit. At 11:40, the knocking came back, and this time it was 3, close together. Exactly what Emma had warned me about first. Both kids went dead silent. Emma actually reached over and pulled her door shut from the inside. Slow and careful, like sudden movement might draw attention. Toby did the same. I stood alone in that hallway between 2 closed doors, and above me, the staircase to the 3rd floor sat in absolute darkness, and something up there had just knocked 3 times, close together. The specific pattern nobody was supposed to answer. I did not go up. I want you to know that, because everything about that decision felt less like bravery and more like the only sane option left to me. I went back downstairs instead, sat in the front room with every light in the house turned on, and waited. At 11:55, 5 minutes before the deadline misses, Ashworth had given both me and, apparently, whatever else lived in that house. The knocking stopped entirely. The silence that followed didn't feel like relief. It felt like held breath. At midnight exactly, headlights swept across the front window, and Mrs. Ashworth's car pulled into the driveway. I have never been so relieved to see another adult silhouette walking toward a front door in my entire life. She came in fast, coat still on, and the first thing she did wasn't ask about the kids. It was walk straight to the base of the staircase and look up into that darkness for a long, silent moment, the way you'd check a wound to see if it was still bleeding. Then she turned to me and said, "You're still here." Not hello, not thank you, "You're still here." Like it was a genuine surprise, like the 4 sitters before me hadn't made it to midnight at all. I asked her, point blank, what was in that room, and who she was, and why a 9- and 7-year-old had an entire rule book memorized for surviving one night in their own house. Mrs. Ashworth sat down across from me, and for the first time all night, the composed mask slipped just slightly at the edges. She told me the house had belonged to her husband's family for 3 generations, that something had happened in it decades before either of them were born, that nobody in the family discussed directly, only referenced sideways, in half sentences passed down like inheritance, that the 3rd floor room had been sealed 4 years before they ever moved in, and unsealed only once, briefly, by her husband's uncle, who never fully explained afterward why he'd done it, or why he stopped speaking almost entirely in the years that followed. She said the knocking had started the week they moved in, and that it responded, somehow, to attention, that ignoring it made it patient, that answering it, even once, even by accident, seemed to feed something that otherwise stayed dormant behind that door. She said the previous sitters hadn't been fired, and hadn't quit exactly either. They'd simply stopped answering calls after nights like this one, and eventually stopped existing in any records the agency could find. University enrollment, family group chats, birthday posts, all of it just quietly ending around the date they'd worked for the Ashworths, like their lives had been paused mid-sentence. I asked her why, if all of that was true. She kept the house, kept the children in it. She looked at me for a long moment, and said something I still think about far more than I'd like to, because leaving doesn't stop it from following whoever it's already noticed, and it noticed me a very long time ago. I didn't sleep that night, not in that house, not in my own apartment afterward either, not for a long while. I drove home a little after 1 in the morning, $600 in cash, my coat pocket, feeling less like I'd been paid for a job, and more like I'd been paid for surviving one. I never went back to the Ashworth house. I told the agency I was unavailable for future requests from that address, and left it at that, because there wasn't a version of the truth I could say out loud that wouldn't get me quietly reassigned to easier clients and a much smaller paycheck. I think about Emma sometimes, about the calm, practiced way she recited rules no 9-year-old should have needed to learn. I think about Toby's rabbit, missing one button eye, and wonder if he still sleeps with it, still counts knocks in the dark, still waits for silence that means nothing rather than silence that means something's close. Mostly, though, I think about the voice that said my name that night, not because it scared me in the moment, though it did. I think about it because of what came after. 3 weeks later, when I got a text from that same 6-digit number, the one that shouldn't exist, the one that had warned me not to open that door. It said only this: "Thank you for not answering. She's still waiting for someone who will." I never learned what happened to the sitters before me. I never learned what, exactly, sat behind that 3rd floor door, sealed and unsealed again across 3 generations of a family that couldn't bring itself to leave. And some nights, when my apartment gets quiet enough, I find myself listening for a single knock, alone, and reminding myself that the only safe sound in that house was never silence at all. It was the sound of nobody answering. What would you have done differently? The moment Emma first told you the rules, would you have left the second Mrs. Ashworth mentioned that pay? Or would curiosity have kept you there just like it kept me? If this story kept you up a little tonight, send it to someone who still believes the scariest horror stories are the quiet ones, the ones without a single drop of blood in them. And subscribe to Eerie Atmos X for the next one, because there's always a next one. The Ashworth house is still standing at the end of Trenholm Road. The porch light still burns orange after dark, and somewhere on the third floor, behind a door nobody in that family has opened in years, something is still counting, patiently, for the next person who forgets not to answer.